Free trade and fair trade. These two terms sound very similar. They both start with an F and end with trade, so a lot of times people get them confused. But here in this video, I want to distinguish what each of the terms actually means and why we like one a lot more than we like the other. I'll start off with free trade. Free trade, it sounds great. Who doesn't love something that's free? In this case, free trade means it's free for corporations to move goods across the border so they can manufacture them wherever they're going to be the cheapest. So again, free trade, it is creating, financial discounts for the creation of goods. So when it comes to the consumers get these goods for a lot cheaper. It makes things a lot more affordable. Free trade also can create jobs in countries where they're desperately needed. Oftentimes they're going to go to some of the most impoverished countries to create the jobs to manufacture them there and move them across the border. So it's creating financial incentives for companies to really move to where it's cheapest. Lifting these trade barriers really creates opportunities for people in need, and that's something that can be great. However, in this case, how it plays out is that often companies go to where it's the cheapest to manufacture them because the workers do not have rights. They're not getting paid a living wage. They're not even getting things that are simple as lunch breaks. Or if they get hurt on the job, they're just kicked out instead of actually being able to help them through those injuries. So some things that we take for granted here in the United States, that's what these trade barriers are really creating the corporations, giving them incentive to go to where people do not even have basic rights. So here's the real face of free trade. It's where there's going to be child labor. It's going to be where they don't care about any injuries or the health of their workers. It's where they're not getting paid enough to even eat or live off of. They're working 10-hour days without getting breaks. They're not allowed to talk to the other workers around them, their friends. They just have to focus on their work for 10 hours straight, maybe get a 15-minute lunch break, even children, and then go on with their day and go on with their life. So a lot of times these things, while free trade may sound great and we may get the products for a lot cheaper, it's not something we'd actually support if we saw the other end of it. So here's a little political cartoon of CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement, and they're getting rid of all the union wages because workers cannot unionize in this environment. If they come together and say, hey, we want some basic rights, well, guess what? They're going to pick up their factory and move it to another country. Because these borders are open and it's very easy to move from one country to another, which is one of the benefits of free trade agreements to corporations. However, those benefits are not paid off to the people actually making the goods. Fair trade, on the other hand, focuses on being fair to the workers and treating them fairly. Again, it's not anything extravagant. It's nothing that we wouldn't expect here in the United States. These are things we take for granted, but we're giving them to people in developing countries where those rights have not yet been established. Here's one example of a fair trade worker, and he creates organic coffee. So he has his own coffee farm. He gets to make a living for his family on it, and he gets a little bit extra to even help his community, because there are other people in the community that do not have the benefits of working in a fair trade environment. So he's allowing, the community to develop, to get himself and his family out of poverty, to create more opportunity for his kids, and really create a future for the place that they live. Just being able to have the basic rights gives him some control over his destiny. Here's another example of fair trade coffee. These people working in a fair trade environment to really, right now they're drying the coffee beans out, and it's allowing them to get paid a fair wage, a livable wage. It's nothing extravagant. It's not like, they're still getting paid dollars a day for work. But for them, in their country, that's all they need to survive. And that's all they need to just have that little bit extra to build themselves a life out of poverty. Here's a free trade, it's a free trade and a fair trade clothing factory. Although one of the problems with free trade agreements is that the free trade agreements often benefit big corporations. So while smaller companies or cooperatives try and get in on it, often there's paperwork and a lot of different barriers set in place to really push them out of the picture. So this place has been shut down for a number of months because they weren't able to file the free trade paperwork in time. So this fair trade company that's trying to give their workers rights has to put their employees out of work for a number of months just because of all the hassle involved that big corporations can easily deal with. and navigate. They can easily navigate these different barriers. Here's another example of people coming together to really create a future for themselves. This is Artisan Goods, and they're coming together to create a fair trade cooperative to build lives for themselves and their families. So here they're coming together to get access to the market, because as individuals they only can sell things to people in their community who may who there's only a limited market there. But by coming together and really establishing themselves and creating opportunity for themselves and building something out of nothing, they're able to help build their communities out of poverty. So these people are not looking for handouts. They're not looking for anything, any sort of incentive that we don't take here for granted here in the United States. They're just asking for some basic opportunity to really create a life for themselves and their families. Again, here's another example of free trade artwork. It's a small nonprofit organization that helps children really paint and use their artistic talents to help the community thrive. It gets them out of difficult lives where they may be more hostile. They may create crime. It gives them a safe environment to really grow in by focusing on the artwork. It gives them something to focus on outside themselves while they're looking at all the poverty around them. Oftentimes these parents are working 10-hour days at work, 6 days a week, so it just gives the children something to do, and they're financing it in a fair trade environment by selling their artwork for a fair and decent price. So make it happen. Choose fair trade. Fair trade is very important because it gives workers rights that we take for granted here in the United States. It gives them some of those same basic benefits like lunch breaks and being able to chat with your coworkers while you're working if you're doing something tedious. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing that we would expect. We would hope for ourselves. We can make it happen. I'm not saying everything you buy needs to be fair trade, but when you're able to choose between a fair trade product or just a normal product on this shelf, fair trade is always the way to go. So please support all sorts of fair trade efforts, and remember that fair trade is very different than free trade.